Hello there, comrades. The name's Yugoslav. You can call me Yugo as well. This is my very first video I'm doing, and the channel will most likely be in some sense of political type. You may realize that the comments in the video are disabled. Well, I prefer debates on a different social media such as Discord. If you want to, you can find me in the Modern Debate server in Discord, where I am known as the Supreme Yugoslav Socialist. Anyways, let's get into the video. Speaking of the modern day, we have a completely different left that is not the one you would know of, that commends the achievements of socialist states such as the USSR under Stalin or China under Mao. Today's left is no longer a staunch advocate of such a true socialist state. Instead, we've been introduced to a quote-unquote left that is dogmatic in its arguing of preserving the capitalist values. A left that is no longer willing to have communism. A left that simply has distorted the very thought of Marxism-Leninism. Whether it's the radical liberal ideas that claim how communism killed over 100 million people and instead propose the insidious democratic socialism or anarchism, or whether is it the so-called Marxist-Leninist that argues how modern-day China is socialist and how allowing of limited trade with foreign capitalist enterprises is progressive for socialism. Today, I will explain to you the factions of the left and their relevance to the modern-day society. Social liberalism is the common trope of non-communist leftists. It is mostly prevalent in the Western world, where numerous leftist parties, whether social democrat, democratic socialist, or a minority of libertarian so-called communists, emphasize the social platform of cultural liberalism and find it to be somehow compatible with the left-wing economics. The thing is that social liberalism, due to its Keynesian nature, basically means that most of these so-called leftists are de facto social democrats and have no will to establish a full socialist economy because it is contradictory to the individualism of the social liberalism. This is commonly also supported by capitalists due to the fact that it maintains a capitalist economy and maintains the international market trade with other capitalists, as well as encouraging exploitation abroad for domestic welfare capitalism. In the end, social liberalism is the reaction against the rather fiscally conservative neoliberalism. Pejoratively, social liberalism itself is the epitome of the Western so-called progressive wanting to fight for so-called social justice, but wanting to maintain capitalism. Since this is pretty much a description of the social democrats as well, there's no need for a separate chapter about them, since social democracy has a lot in common with social liberalism. Syndicalists seek for a socialist society governed by workers' unions. They evolve from agreements with Proudhon's mutualist economy, but also tend to agree with Bakunin's more revolutionary aspect. On Marx, they agree with him on the circumstance that the state is inherently exploitative, thus embracing the anti-authoritarian stance, just like the anarchists. Syndicalists and anarchists are allies to one another. United in opposition against Marxism-Leninism, early syndicalists opposed admitting women because of the fact that Proudhon was against having women also play in the role of socialism. While taking on the aspect of direct action through general strikes and sabotage, the syndicalists are more passive than Marxist-Leninists and anarchists on the revolutionary aspect, again due to their opposition of a worker state and wanting a society governed solely by unions and not by the party vanguard, as syndicalists argue that the political parties are unnecessary as they only include those aligned to their views, fearing that a large-scale revolution will lead to a bureaucracy. Anarchism is the infantile disorder. Its emphasis on a completely stateless society which they demand to happen immediately after a revolution is a recipe for disaster, as anarchist movements in the past would rather just get crushed by the bourgeois forces due to their lack of organization. Why do anarchists lack organization? When organizing, they prefer an extremely decentralized aspect, meaning that each of their kind get to decide when to strike at capitalism and when. This also means the free will to do whatever it pleases the anarchist. The Confederation of Anarchists in the Spanish Civil War had Catalonia for itself, but failed to fight against fascism, instead spending a year fighting against the communists, as well as committing themselves to an immediate social change in Catalonia in the midst of a civil war. Because of this, the manpower of the anti-fascists dropped significantly as the anarchists declared themselves as a third party of the Civil War. The loose structure of the Confederation of Anarchists in Liberia, due to the anarchist principles of the decentralization as well as the opposition to any form of state authority, led to the defeat and complete annihilation of the movement. In contrast, the communists gained a reputation for being extremely disciplined. The centralized structure of the communist command made it possible to prevent any deviations. In conclusion, the anarchist ideology is flawed and will never work for reasons explained above. No anarchist movement had overthrown the entire bourgeois nation compared to communists who overthrew entire capitalist nations of Russia, China, and even Yugoslavia, as well as liberating others from capitalist exploitation with a professional revolutionary armed force. Market socialists, well, they are illegitimate to the socialist cause. They have taken on a capitalist approach to maintain a socialist society. Their arguments are that socialist nations must open their markets to foreign trade and foreign investment, but also promise to maintain socialism. This undoubtedly has corrupted many socialist states and sealed their eventual downfall, such as Yugoslavia under Tito and the Soviet Union from Khrushchev to Gorbachev, as well as the current so-called actually existing socialist states such as China, Vietnam, Cuba, and Laos. While good in increasing the GDP, market socialism's encouragement of private enterprises within the socialist state is not the conventional socialist approach to a better economy. This ultimately dismisses the need of a developed national industry to produce for its workers, guided by the allocation of resources by the workers' state through the Vanguard Party and the rejection of foreign investment, which may promote anti-communist and revisionist thoughts against the socialist state. Market socialists oppose this, yet again using the so-called human rights argument to justify the more individual approach to strengthening an economy. Speaking of trading, socialist states are best at trading with each other rather than trading with the capitalist nations, as exchange between socialist states only prevents any form of discrepancy from corrupting the two states, as both stick to the principles of socialism and communism. As such, it is the reason why the Comic-Con has existed and why we need a new Comic-Con to cleanse off the market socialist menace and re-establish the true socialist economy that Stalin was able to master in his years, as well as cut off any trade with the capitalists. As we enter Marxism-Leninism, we encounter that there are revisionist tendencies even for the authoritarian aspect of socialism and communism. We have already listed market socialists as one example, but there are other forms of revisionism that must be listed. These are Trotskyists, Lefkoms, National Bolsheviks or Nazbols, which basically is a minority of edgelords, followers of Russian Stalinism developed by Alexandr and Edward Limonov in most cases. Regarding the ideology of DPRK or Juche, it is mystic for a reason that due to an extremely isolationist nature, it has created its own religion, greater than that of what people talk about Stalin's personality. Economically, the DPRK might be the last truly socialist state if we employ the notion of a socialist economy according to Stalin. Marxism-Leninism was once the dominant force for socialism and communism, and even leftism as a whole. Marxism-Leninism has been reduced greatly and declined after Stalin's death. Revisionists have distorted it greatly to the point where people say that China today is socialist despite practicing a form of state capitalism with its so-called socialist market economy. Marxist-Leninists are those who follow Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin. Stalin combined the Marxist and Leninist aspects into one, but never had an ideology of his own despite what many anti-Stalin opponents say. Even Stalin himself opposed using the word of Stalinism, correctly asserting that it would be a form of cult of personality, which is why only his opponents ever used the term. Sadly, there is a relatively small amount of anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists who stick to the principles of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin without deviating away, and as most have become anti-Stalin, whether by reasons of calling Stalin a homophobe or by rejecting the totalitarian nature of Stalin, thus ignoring the historical context as to why Stalin wanted the USSR to rely on its own industry and production and not to rely on foreign investment and foreign trade. These are pretty much all the major factions which describe most, if not the entirety, of the leftist spectrum. The left is broad, just like the right, and their views have changed over time from the days of the French Revolution to the present day of 2020's world. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoyed my first attempt in political commentary. I'll see you next time.